Prison is a sad and scary place. You're stuck, with nowhere to go. The energies in such a desolate place is usually never positive. Grab a blanket, turn off your lights for 3 prison ghost stories. My brief experience at Alcatraz. As much as I believe in ghosts and have had experiences throughout my entire life, I'll be honest, when my family and I got to Alcatraz in the middle of the day during our vacation to San Francisco, I didn't expect much of anything to happen, especially not since it was absolutely swarming with people. Being the 75th anniversary of the prison, at least I think, they had posters mentioning this when we walked in, and were selling shirts saying as much. And you really couldn't go anywhere and be alone in the entire complex, inside or out. That was fine by me though. I was just excited to get a chance to explore the buildings and island. And as much of a paranormal enthusiast as I am, it didn't really bother me to think that I might not have any sort of ghostly encounter there. Obviously, since I'm telling my story here, I was wrong in my doubting. But what happened on that vacation was something I was happy to experience, no matter the fact it definitely creeped me out in the moment. Mostly because I've always wanted to visit this prison, and it was a great memory. Better than any other souvenir I could have bought at the gift store. Things went pretty much as expected for a while. We decided to take the self-guided audio tour and look around, like everybody else was doing. As usual, I was going ahead of my family, since my parents and brother had my little sister with them, and my grandmother was stopping every few minutes to take a ton of pictures for memories. At one point, I got far enough ahead of them that I decided to wait, and I really wish I had been paying attention to which cell block I was at, so that I could look up more stories and histories of the prison to see if anybody else had the same experience. But I leaned up against one of the cells in a block that had less people than the others to wait for the rest of my family to catch up. While I was there, I felt something grab onto the back of my coat, with enough force to pull the back of my bra strap with it, followed by a low, husky male voice saying, "Hey." The voice was actually pretty loud, and that, combined with my bra strap pulling away from then snapping back against my skin, startled me enough to jump away from the cell and spin around to look. Nothing was there, of course. The pulling and the voice weren't really malicious or suggestive in any way. It seemed and felt more like somebody trying to get my attention. But it sure surprised me, and then after that, I thought that was just the coolest thing ever and was overjoyed to have gotten a paranormal experience my first time at Alcatraz, since it's so far away from where I live. I really wish I could share this experience with my family, but my father is a huge skeptic. My brother doesn't have any interest in the paranormal after telling my parents of his own experiences and having my father telling him to stop being so ridiculous. My mother believes, but pretends she doesn't in my dad's presence. And my grandmother, I'm not sure. I know she's experienced things, but she's also getting really preachy on the matter sometimes. So I'm eternally grateful a site like this exists, where I can share my stories with like-minded people, or skeptics, who are a bit more open-minded than my family. I'm really curious if anybody else has anything happen at Alcatraz that was similar to my experience though. If you have, please tell me. Ghosts in a prison. My dad used to work in a prison. Before it was a prison, it was a place where people got executed. One day, my dad was working the whole night and decided that about 2 a.m. he would take a little nap, as he had finished all he needed to do. He fell asleep quickly, but woke up at around 3 a.m. to the sounds of laughter and joy. He was about to stand up when he found he could not move his arms. He panicked and looked around to see what was happening. He turned his head and saw 2 monks holding his legs and arms. The monks were quite young and he knew they were not going to hurt him. Then one thing scared him so much he started shouting for help. The monks had blood running down their body everywhere. It trickled down their necks. The laughter got louder as though they enjoyed seeing him so scared. As soon as he shouted, the monks disappeared with one last laugh and they were gone. And finally he could move his arms again. People ran into the room and asked what was wrong. He told them what happened. Everyone asked where the blood from the monks were. He looked everywhere and found not a drop of blood anywhere. They all told him it was a dream and nothing happened, but he knew it was not and stuck to his story. Thank you for reading. Phantom Inmate. In 2007, at the facility I worked at, we had a suicide. A young inmate hung himself in his cell and was unable to be saved. The coroner's report would list time of death on the way to the hospital by suffocation or more general, lack of oxygen. In the short amount of time the inmate had, he managed to crush his larynx with a bedsheet made into a rope. So no matter what help he was being given, nothing could revive him from his goal of death. I know this is very common amongst prison settings and is seldom remembered years later. Some say ghosts have unfinished business, and that is why they hang around. I only write this because I knew the inmate and the fellow officers, who, knowing me, brought the story to my attention. Bear with me while I try and lay the scene and the occurrences as best as I can remember. Several officers run the housing units where the inmates are housed. This particular inmate was in the mental health dorm of the maximum confinement unit where I used to work. The housing unit is a 2-story unit with individual cells housing at most 2 inmates per cell. Generally, in mental health, the inmates are housed alone. Only trained officers are assigned to these units, meaning they have some degree of knowledge in mental health, human behavior, and have a calm demeanor. The dorm has 2 officers assigned to mental health dorm, and they are relieved by a sergeant or officers with similar training. Usually the same officers will work the dorm for years at a time. During a count, Officer Jones was checking all cells and noticed that in cell number 10, that an inmate was standing in the cell looking out the window towards the stars. Officer Jones checks his clipboard to see which inmate were being housed in the cell, being as there were 2 inmates asleep in their bunks and 1 standing. He recognized the names and knew both, but did not recognize the inmate standing, observing the sky so intently. He called down to Officer Smith and asked who the 3rd inmate in cell 10 was. Officer Smith checked his computer and his logs and told Officer Jones that there were only 2 inmates assigned to the cell. Officer Jones went down to the officer's desk and began looking through the head sheet, which shows all inmates' names and a mugshot photo. The inmates in question could not be found on the sheet. Both officers decided they needed to check the cell. Upon arrival at the cell door, they both only noticed 2 inmates, still asleep in their bunks, and the 3rd was nowhere to be found. They opened the cell door, checked the walls, vents, and anywhere else a tunnel could have been dug, but to no avail. Officer Smith then asked for a description of the inmate that Officer Jones had seen. Jones described a slender-built, medium-height black male, possibly in his late teens or early 20s. They had several inmates fitting that description, so they went cell by cell and checked every bunk. All the inmates were accounted for, all asleep in their bunks. A few nights went by, and Officer Jones was telling his story to a fellow officer who had stopped by the zone to get some coffee and chew the fat. The officer thought it was funny that full-grown men could still believe in such fairy tales, and proceeded to poke fun at the officers and the ghost in question, when all the officers present noticed a black transparent cloud move from the lower staircase, linger for a few seconds, and then enter the supply closet. They each said that as the object moved, the lights would dim, but the wall and brick could still be seen through the dark smoke. The next night they noticed the black transparent cloud in the visitation area on the upper tier in the housing unit, moving through the rooms one by one. Then it would descend the stairs and enter the supply closet. As I began writing this, I had the opportunity to work on this pod for a night, and figured it would be a good chance to see if anything out of the ordinary would happen. Nothing did, but I was told by several inmates that there has been a little girl roaming the housing unit, and they call her Dixie. I asked the inmate why they called her that, and he said due to her having deep blue eyes and a pale white complexion. The inmate even went as far as to show me a picture of her that he had drawn. In the picture, it shows a girl, possibly about 7 years old, in clothing that could only be described as Sunday dress clothes, medium height, and a slender build with long hair that the inmate said was black. He told me she never speaks, but she walks the floor every night, and she has been turning on showers and lights on and off. I will stick with this one because it has caught my interest, not so much the black cloud being, as I could understand why it would be at this place. All the dark energy surrounds a place like this, so it's not so far-fetched to see such a negative entity. But the little girl makes no sense at all. Why would it be here, and what connection does it have to this place? Perhaps a victim coming back to haunt its tormentor in life, or just a wandering lost spirit, or possibly maybe just a figment of the inmate's imagination. The names of the officers in the story are generic names that I plucked from the sky. I will not post the real names, even if they wanted me to.